provocative, topical, and timely Met webinar. For a young person growing up anywhere in the West today, it's not always easy to be a proud Jew or a proud Zionist. Most have seen the Jewish state that we have grown to love being subjected to double standards, being demonized, and members of the IDF who are trying to protect and defend ordinary Israeli citizens dehumanized, sometimes by their own professors on college campuses throughout the West, and very often by their peers. You know, we all were outraged to read an editorial by the editorial staff of the Harvard Crimson saying that they're throwing their lot in with the BDS movement. And in the Human Rights Council of the United Nations, as Russia continues to execute its morally atrocities against Ukraine, and as horrific human rights abusers such as Iran, Venezuela, the Sudan, Yemen, North Korea continue to go ignored, the Human Rights Council is obsessively preoccupied with passing resolutions against the state of Israel, 3 alone this past April, and is determined to refer it to the International Criminal Court for defending its people's right to live in peace and security, free from acts of terror. Today, and this evening in the United States, are up and right now in Israel, and up until this evening in the United States, rather, we commemorate Yom HaZikaron and remember the more than 24,000 young members of the IDF who made the ultimate sacrifice so that finally, after centuries of humiliation, degradation, and persecution, we would have a Jewish state. But the price has been very dear. When the sirens are wailed in the streets of Jerusalem, Haifa, and Tel Aviv, everyone stands at attention. We all know someone who gave their lives in defense of the Jewish state. But no one just a few short years ago in terms of history would have dreamed that Israel would become the economic, technological, and military powerhouse that it is today. And with the only field hospital in Ukraine, among so many other examples, it is arguably a humanitarian powerhouse as well. And in a few short hours, the celebration of the return to our ancient homeland and independent Jewish sovereignty begins. So we are here today to receive a booster shot in Zionism 101. It is really my pleasure to introduce you to Gil Troy. Gil is a distinguished scholar in North American Jewish history at McGill University, who currently resides in Jerusalem. Gil is an award-winning American presidential historian and a leading Zionist activist, designated by the Algemeiner Journal as J-101, one of the top 100 people positively influencing Jewish life. Gil wrote The Age of Clinton, America in the 1990s, and 8 other books on the American presidency. One leading historian called The Age of Clinton the best book on the man and the times. His latest book, co-authored with the former Soviet prisoner of Zion and human rights activist, the esteemed Natan Sharansky Never Alone, Prison Politics and My People, was published by the Public Affairs of Hachette. Troy's previous book, The Zionist Ideas, was a 2019 National Jewish Book Award finalist, and I promise to get tons of those books to pass on to every young person I know. Troy's book, Moynihan's Movement, America's Fight Against Zionism as Racism, describes the fall of the UN, the rise of Reagan, and the spread of Anti-Zionism Jewish Ideas. Jewish Ideas Daily designated it as one of 2012's best books. Gil just completed writing the introductions as editor-in-chief for an exciting new edition of Theodore Herzl's Zionist writings to be published by Quorum Books and launching its Library of the Jewish People. And he has served as consultant and writer for a series of videos based on the Zionist ideas for Open Door Media to be released this spring. Troy has been a featured commentator on CNN's popular part documentaries, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s. He's been interviewed on most major North American television and radio networks, with recent essays in the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. Gil, it's my honor to introduce you to our audience today and for you to explain, why are you a Zionist?
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. You forgot to add one thing in my CV, which is that I'm also a member of the Stern fan club. My brother Tevi and my late mother and my father and the entire Troy clan, and we really honor all the amazing work that you do, and you're also your hachnasat orchim, your beautiful welcome to all guests. So thank you, and I feel at home, even though we're 6,000 miles away. As Sarah mentioned, this is a very holy moment in Jerusalem. And I wish you were with me and you could hear the silence. There's still a very heavy silence in Jerusalem from the moment of that first loud siren last night at 8 p.m. and then the longer 2-minute siren at 11 a.m. There's just been this heaviness in the air. And an hour and 3/4 from now, we'll have a change, a very unnerving change. For many of my friends who have really lost loved ones, it's a difficult shift. It's a great point how we Jews are able to turn on a dime, and how we go from fasting before Purim to reading the Megillah. But that's not as personal. It's not as deep. And last night, when I was sitting with my wife and 3 of my 4 kids in a row at the memorial service just down the block from us, and each one of us was thinking about somebody else. I know that when the siren was going, I was thinking about my friend Chaim Avraham, whose son Benny had been kidnapped on the Syrian border. And it was supposed to be a safe, Syrian-Lebanon border. It was supposed to be a safe area in 2000. And then Chaim spent 3 years searching for his son. And Benny was killed. But when Chaim died of cancer just a few years ago, and I visited him on his deathbed, he said, I too am a victim of those murderers, because it destroyed his life. But I also know that I had the privilege of being at both of Benny's sisters and Chaim's daughter's weddings. And now they have grandchildren. And now the life continues. So I was thinking of him as the siren was sounding. And then during the ceremony, as we heard one story after another, I started thinking about the 56 soldiers and the civilians who died this year. I thought of Major Itamar El-Harar and Major Ofek Aharon, who were killed in the friendly fire incident. And Or El-Harar was interviewed a few weeks later, and she said, I have no animus in my heart, no anger in my heart against that poor young man who made a mistake and shot my husband, because I know my husband could have been on the other end shooting him by mistake. This is what happens sometimes in war. And it's the enemies who put us in that situation who are truly responsible. And I was just thinking of the price we pay. But in an hour and 3/4, we're going to be celebrating. And we're going to be rejoicing in the amazing miracle that we're living. And right now we're in what the great educator Avram Infeld calls, we have the 10 days of awe in September, October, the beginning of the Jewish year. He calls this the 9 days of we, which is in French, 9 days of anachnu, the 9 days of us, the 9 days of we, the 9 days of power, the 9 days of togetherness. And you know what my favorite days of those 9 days are? It's not Yom HaShoah, certainly, and it's not Yom HaZikaron, and it's not even Yom HaTzmaut. It's the normal days in between, because the normal days we're really living the miracle. Tonight we'll be celebrating the miracle, and that's important. But day to day we feel, I was just having coffee in the garden with a friend of mine, and we're just saying how lucky we feel to be a part of this extraordinary Jewish state. And as you mentioned, Israel 20, 30, 40 years ago was much more primitive, right? Once upon a time, Israeli wine was that sweet, syrupy caramel wine. Israeli cuisine was, do we have hummus or falafel? Oh, the next day we have a choice between falafel or hummus. It's now a much more sophisticated country, but it still is the country of we, the country of us, the country of not just never again, but the country of never alone, where it's all a part of us. Now, a few years ago, I had a challenge. I was invited by the Consul General of Montreal to toast Israel on Rosh Hashanah. And I feel a similar challenge today. How do I speak to so many of you who love Israel, who understand Israel, 145 of you on the line? What do you need to hear from me? And so I said, I've updated the numbers. I said, you know, when I think about Israel, I think of 25.6, I think of 43, I think of 67.2, and I think of 75. And they'll say, oh, Troy's off his rocker. No, and I'm not even a mathematician. My daughter's a mathematician. What do I mean? 25.6 is $25.6 billion in investment last year in startups and in high tech. By the way, when I first did this, it was 4 billion. 4 billion was the amount of money that Warren Buffett had made in his big investment in ISCAR. This goes back 15, 20 years, as you can tell. Israel is number 2 per capita in the world in startup investment. And again, when we contrast the Israel of today, which is an Israel of tomorrow, with the Israel of the 50s, 60s, 70s, it really is a living miracle. 25.6. When I say 43, I'm talking about the percentage of Israeli pharmacists who are Arabs. In a country which is, we're told by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, is an apartheid state, especially during Corona, we realized, some of us knew this before, that Arabs are approximately 20% of the Israeli population of 9 million today. 20% of Israeli doctors are our Arab brothers and sisters. 23% of Israeli nurses are our brothers and sisters. And 43% are pharmacists. And there was this marvelous picture which was spread during the start of the coronavirus of a Magen David Adom vehicle. And we should point out that Magen David Adom travels all over Israel. And what does it say? It usually has donated by the Stern family, by the Schwartz family, or by a lover of Israel in the diaspora, because we are one and we know that you're never alone. And so they had a picture of this ambulance with that dedication, and the 2 drivers had stopped to pray. And one of them was turning toward Mecca and praying, and one of them was turning toward Jerusalem and praying. One Arab, one Jew, one Muslim, one Jew, working together, living together in this apartheid state. That's 43. And when I say 67.2, 67.2% of Israelis voted in the last election. And you know, we Israelis love democracy so much that we have voted once, twice, 3, 4 times in the last 2 years. We might have a 5th one in September. And we know that in the United States, and I'm speaking to many Washingtonians, 67.2% is a percentage of participation that we haven't reached in a presidential election since the 19th century. And that shows the vitality of Israeli democracy. But you know what the real miracle is? It's not just that we were able to plant a democracy in the rocky soil of the Middle East, and we're the only democracy in this corner of the world. The real miracle is that the 3 million Jews who've been absorbed by a country which in 1948 was merely 600,000, including the 70,000 Holocaust survivors and the 850,000 Jews from Arab and Muslim countries. We don't call them refugees. We call them citizens. We call them brothers and sisters. We don't keep a refugee status going from generation to generation to generation. Only the Palestinians do that. The Indians didn't do it. The Pakistanis didn't do it. The Europeans didn't do it. And certainly the Jews don't do it. And we think of, so they came from Morocco, and they came from Syria, and they came from Russia, and they came from Poland, and more recently they came from Ethiopia. They didn't come from countries with a democratic tradition, and yet we have been able to create a democracy here. A delightfully dysfunctional democracy sometimes, like all democracies. But what an amazing miracle. Now, of course, that shows 2 important lessons which are often overlooked. One, how deeply democratic the Jewish tradition was, both in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe for centuries. And it also shows people like to say, oh, Jewish or democratic, as if they're in constant conflict. And there are sometimes tensions. But where does democracy come from? With all due respect to the Greeks, and I honor their contribution, it comes from the Bible. Tzelem Elokim. The notion that every one of us has God's spirit within us, leads us to equality, which leads us to human dignity, which leads us to democracy. So maybe the picture's a little more complicated. When I go into college campuses, back when travel was a verb, I would speak to students and I would say, you know, if I speak, you say, hallelujah, I see the light, you make me nervous. because the next speaker is going to be funnier and better looking and smarter. Say, hallelujah, I see the grays. I see the complexity. I see the dimensionality. Then we've got a conversation. So we have 25.6 billion. We have 43%. We have 67.2%. And the last number, 75. 75, because tomorrow, or tonight, as we start the 74th anniversary of the State of Israel, we should be building up to the biggest party in centuries, the Diamond Jubilee of Israel. And even before that, tomorrow I have homework for you. You can't sit with a professor for an hour and not get some homework. You know, it's a problem. Look, you see my white shirt, because on Yom HaZikaron, we all walk around in white shirts. And I was talking to this friend of mine today about what are the other rituals that have emerged around Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaTzmaut. And what are the difficulties? What's the, now we know in Israel, right? What's the smell of Yom HaZikaron? I'm sorry, Yom HaTzmaut? Burnt barbecue. Everybody has a barbecue. And he said, well, do American Jews take the day off and have a barbecue? I said, I only wish. So I would like to give you homework. I want us to start a new ritual. I want us to have ice cream for breakfast every Yom HaTzmaut. I want us to wake our kids up and wake ourselves up and bring the kid out within us. And Jewish day schools do it as well. But at every home, if we woke up on Yom HaTzmaut, on Israel Independence Day, and I hope this really becomes a very popular practice by 75, and in Israel we'll all have Ben and Jerry's because they still have the contract, and in the United States eat anything but Ben and Jerry's. And if we have ice cream for breakfast, we'll be ritualizing, and we'll be remembering the power of ritual, and the power of ritual is a way to memorialize and to celebrate this remarkable miracle. And one more thing. So I've been talking about this for a couple of years because I want it to be sweet. I want it to be special. I want it to be surprising. I want it to be delightful. But I have a friend of mine from Tunisia, and she reported last Shavuot, when we were talking about how unused the Jews of Tunisia were to dairy products, she reported that she had never had ice cream until she arrived in the land of Israel. Why? Because the ice cream shops in Jerba on her island were all unkosher. So as you have that taste tomorrow morning of ice cream, also imagine the taste of freedom to Safta Sofer, to Shula Sofer, and to all the other Jews who arrived in Israel. And that's the celebration. And that's what I want to emphasize. And that's why I am a Zionist today. I am a Zionist because I feel so lucky to be a part of this extended family. I am a Zionist because I feel so lucky to be a part of this great adventure. Think of it. What a crazy story. A people disrespected, oppressed, persecuted, lost, broken, burnt in the chimneys of Auschwitz, coming to the land and creating this miracle. Last Shabbat, I was at my pop-up minyan. It'll be very hard. I'm sorry if there are any rabbis on the line to get me back into a real synagogue. We've been praying in a garden for 2 years now and loving it. And we got a beautiful Dvar Torah about how Jews aren't supposed to predict the future. We dream, but we don't predict the future. And my friend Eliav, who served as a commander in Duvduvan, the elite commando forces for 10 years, said something profound. He said, think about it. In 1945, in the camps, would anybody have dared imagine this miracle today? I said, even think about in 1945 in freedom in the United States, in Washington, D.C., in the United Kingdom, in Canada, would anybody have dared imagine this miracle? So let's celebrate that miracle. And that's why I'm a Zionist. But why am I out as a Zionist? Indulge me. Let me tell you a little bit of my story. So you just see my name, Gil Troy. I have a great name. It means that I get amazing reception at Greek restaurants. It means I get a lot of Helen of Troy jokes from the older generation. The younger generation does Sparta and talks about 365 and the Trojans. And why is my name Gil Troy? My father, who, like so many of our parents and grandparents and even great-grandparents now, came over on, their parents came over on the boat, right? And as if there was one, the boat, which fit 2 million people from 1880 to 1920 and dumped us all in America. And of course, we know there are many other people who came in other ways, but still the bulk of the American Jewish experience is those of us who have parents and grandparents and great-grandparents who came over from 1880 to 1920. And he grew up in the Lower East Side. And he grew up saddled with this last name Troyansky. And what was the message that he got? And frankly, the great blessing of America, that you especially live in Washington. You can fit in, you can belong, you can pass. And so just before I was born, he gave our name an anskiectomy, and we became Troy. But my father also had a different message. As a proud Beitari, as a proud member of the right-wing Zionist movement, I often say, I love to go to Orthodox synagogues and say, I believe in intermarriage. Because my father came from the right-wing Beitar movement. My mother spent a year on the left-wing Habonim Year in Israel program. My father-in-law was from Hanor HaTzioni, which was mainstream Zionist in Romania. And my late mother-in-law was from Hashomer Tzir, the left-wing Zionist movement. I married Linda, who was from the left-wing Hashomer Tzir Zionist movement. I came from Young Judea, which was the central Zionist movement. And our kids went to Bnei Akiva, the religious Zionist movement. So I love that kind of intermarriage. And my father, as a proud Beitari, understood the power of also standing out. And so he saddled us, and saddled me in particular, with this name Gilad. He gave my brother Tevi an even more complicated name, but we'll talk about that in group therapy later. So there I am, I'm in Salman Schechter School, a conservative day school, growing up in the 60s and 70s in New York, but all my friends have normal names. They're James and Elliot and Mitchell and Richard, and I had Gilad. And when they get to tea, they would fumble and they'd go, Gillard, Gillard, so just Gil. So I became Gil Troy. And like so many of you on the call, I know our story. I was under tremendous pressure to succeed. And so I got that sky-high GPA, and I had that perfect CV, and I wrote that insane essay we force our kids to write about how I, at the age of 17, am the center of the universe and the master of the universe, and that's why Harvard or Yale and Rutgers or University of Maryland must accept me or they will collapse. And we wonder why our students arrive on campus and have a little bit of an attitude problem. And I was lucky I got accepted to Harvard. And there I am, and I stayed on for graduate school. I'm teaching the revolutionary transformation of America as an assistant, a course assistant, the head TA of Bernard Balin's legendary course. So there I am in the Kodesh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies of Waspdom. Waspdom, you can't get any waspier than that, right? White English, that's some Protestants, wasps. Right there we are in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at Harvard, speaking about the revolution. And one of my fellow TAs, Richard John, comes up to me. And you know how wasps have first names that are last names and last names on first name, Richard John, right? So he comes up to Gil Troy. And Troy could be Troy Aikman, Troy Donahue, Troy from High School Musical. And he goes, oh, there are so few wasps like us around nowadays. And I put on my heaviest New York accent and said, even fewer than you think. Now, I did not experience that as anti-Semitism. I experienced that as, wow, I pass, I belong, I fit in, it works. The American dream works. I can turn it on and turn it off when convenient. And so I was lucky, I got my PhD. I get a job at McGill University, and I continue to build my career as Gil Troy, American historian. So much so that I teach the second half of the survey course, 1865 to the present. I believe that senior professors, senior, of course, a nice word for old, senior professors should teach the freshman course, the introductory course, remember the basics, and bring people into the exciting adventure of learning. And so every year would happen, because, you know, Canadians are very polite in Toronto, and Torontonians are particularly polite. And so 2 or 3 students would come up to me and go, oh, Professor Troy, because I'm teaching this lecture course, there are 150 or 200 students every year, and it's very formal, and I'm at the front, and, you know, it's applause. And so they come up to me after class, and they go, oh, Professor Troy, we're taking off the next 2 nights, as if we meet at night, right? But they're so nervous. And I go, really, why? And they go, we have to go back to Toronto for the Passover Seder's. And I say, well, will you do me a favor? And they go, yeah. I say, will you make up the work? And they go, of course. And I go, okay, will you do me one more favor? And they go, yeah. I say, we also make sure to have a Chag Sameach. Oh, he's Jewish, we didn't know. And then, of course, we have a little, you know, what we call bageling. And again, I like the ability to pass. And so I built my career that way. But in 2000, 2 things happened. One, I started volunteering for Birthright, this amazing gift to the next generation, saying, come on, too many American Jews are raised these days as nothings. You can be a something. Take this gift of a 10-day trip to Israel with no strings attached. Just join the club and see what it's like and be captains of your own Jewish journey. You know, the first wave of Birthright students were so ignorant that they put out all these signs and had advertisements saying, Shana Tova, because it was first in September, Shana Tova, if you're interested in a free trip of Israel, please send an email to birthrightisrael.com, whatever. And they got back, Dear Mr. Tova, thank you for this offer. Because people just, this is the generation that was so distanced. So I get that excitement of seeing through their eyes the power of Israel and how it can bring people in to a new Jewish conversation, a new Jewish experience, a multidimensional Jewish experience, a live Jewish experience. Now, the first time a Birthright trip went was in December 1999. I went in February 2000. And in September 2000, Yasser Arafat leads his people away from negotiation back to terror. And all of a sudden, it's our fault. All of a sudden, we're guilty. All of a sudden, Israel's on the docket. And here I am in Montreal. And in Montreal in particular, because in Canada, they worship the UN. And in Montreal in particular, because they want to be European. In Montreal in particular, because Canada is less pro-Israel than the United States. And Montreal is less pro-Israel than Toronto. No one is standing up for Israel. And so first, hiding behind my name, Gil Troy, I write articles defending Israel when, for example, the USS Cole is bombed by Al-Qaeda. In September 2000, a year before 9/11, early October, I write an article attacking terrorism and linking the two. And it's getting worse and worse. And it's 21 years ago, April 2001, Yom Ha'atzmaut. And I have my rebirth. I have a friend, Sharon Shalom, who is an Ethiopian rabbi who has a congregation of Holocaust survivors in Kiryat Gat here in Israel. I love people who cross wires and surprise us. And he tells a story that his grandfather, who's quite old, was once celebrating a birthday. And he said, Grandpa, how old are you? He said, I'm 8. He said, Grandpa, you're not 8. He says, yes, because it's been 8 years since I made Aliyah, since I came to Jerusalem. And I don't count for the 14 years that I've been living in Israel. I say I'm 21 years old because 21 years ago, I came out of the closet. 21 years ago, I wrote an 800-word essay in the Montreal Gazette that changed my life. I wrote Why I Am a Zionist because I was so upset by how defensive we were. I was so upset by how apologetic we were. Remember, back then, it's April 2001, it's before 9/11, before most American Jews started noticing the terrorism that had already started in September 2000. It's April 2001, not April 2002. Israel itself is reacting to the terrorism in a reactive way. It's only after 130 Jews were killed in March 2002, 30 of them at the Passover massacre in Netanya, March 31st, 2002, that Ariel Sharon led on a counteroffensive and understood the only way to fight terrorism is to put the terrorists on the defensive, not the Jewish people on the defensive, not innocent victims on the defensive, not the American people and Democrats, lowercase d, on the defensive. So this is a difficult moment. Everybody's saying, we're at fault. What did we do wrong? But I had learned from Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the great U.S. ambassador to Israel, the U.S. ambassador to the UN and 4-term senator from New York, who said, when everybody said, what's wrong with Israel? Everybody's so angry at Israel. What did Israel do wrong? I literally got a question like that last week from somebody who said, there's so much smoke, there's so much fire, there must be some smoke around there. What did they do wrong? And I learned from him, you don't ask what's wrong with the accused. You ask what's wrong with the accuser. And so I'm just struck by how defensive everybody is. And so I write this 800-word essay and come out in the Montreal Gazette saying, I am a Zionist. I am a Zionist because Jews are not just a religion, but we're also a people. I am a Zionist because I'm a proud nationalist. I'm not afraid of that word. Because my two names, my first and second name to a nationalist, are liberal democratic nationalists, lowercase L, lowercase d. I don't know, as an American historian, how to tell the story of America without talking about a proud nationalism, a constructive nationalism, a nationalism that soars and dreams. I said, I'm a proud Zionist because I'm lucky for all the challenges today. We're living in a moment where we have a Jewish army, we have a Jewish state, and we can be proud Americans, but also proud Jews and proud Zionists. Because it's not either or, because we have shared values and we have shared interests. And now I add shared challenges too. I made 15 points about why I was so lucky to be living in this age. And I came home that night and I said to my wife, I said, from now on, if a package comes into our house and a letter comes into our house and we don't know where it comes from, we don't open it. And I eventually took my name off our house so nobody could find us, could find me, because I became such a lightning rod in Montreal. And I expected to get attacked. And in fact, there was one very clever guy in Lebanon who took that essay and took every one of my lines and turned it to from I Am A Zionist to I Am A Racist. I expected that. But what I didn't expect, and here's the essence of my message today, was how many, do you remember there was this thing called letters back then where people would write something or type something and fold it and then send it to you and stamp? I get all these letters and emails from all over the Jewish world saying, thank you, somebody's saying something positive. And from there came my vision of what I call identity Zionism. Political Zionism is the notion that we are a people, not just a religion. And I explain this by talking about the Oreo cookie. Just like the Oreo cookie has the cookie part and the cream part, and that's what makes it the most popular cookie in the world. It says it on the internet, and everything on the internet is true. Okay, that part maybe isn't true, but we have that, we're this mix, right? If you go to Genesis 12, Reshit Yud Bet, Lech Lecha, leave your house, or Lech Lecha, maybe in a still small voice, I will make of you a great, not religion, a great people. The holiday of Passover is a moment of religious redemption or national liberation, both. The Western Wall, is it a symbol of national liberation or religious redemption? Both. So we're a mix. So Zionism, political Zionism, is we are a people, we have ties to a particular homeland, and we have the right to establish a state on that homeland. Identity Zionism, the Zionism of today, is a platform which says, what's the great fear today? I know we have a spike in anti-Semitism, but even the college anti-Semitism, there are a few college students getting beaten up. It's an attack on our souls. It's an attack on our identity. It's guided missiles aimed at our conscience and our desire to be loved and accepted. We have an identity crisis in the Western world today, in America today. The New York Times just pointed out that over 50% of our young people are suffering from psychic problems, from psychological problems. And most of it is not about the pressure that we're under to succeed. It's about a loss of identity. So identity Zionism is an opportunity to say, wow, we're so lucky. I'm not arrogant enough or smart enough to tell you that Israel's perfect or that Zionism is the only way, but it's our way. It's our 3,500-year-old conversation about meaning, about depth, about framework. And so identity Zionism says, come on in, join the party. Join the conversation. And if political Zionism is about establishing the state, political Zionism today is about defending the state and perfecting the state, and that's really important. We don't negate political Zionism, but we add to it identity Zionism. And identity Zionism takes what John F. Kennedy says and plays with it. John F. Kennedy said, if you recall, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. I want to ask, what can your country do for you? Sitting in Kemp Mill or Washington, D.C., or Mexico City, or Montevideo, or Montreal. What does having an Israel mean for you? How does it give you a sense of rootedness? How does it give you something that's more significant, something more historic than last week's most popular YouTube of some cat rolling around or some baby drooling? How does it root us in a story of 3,500 years that helps us understand who we are? How does it give us a sense of community and a sense of responsibility and a sense of purpose? That's what identity Zionism is about. And to start summing up, which is my way of saying this is an opportunity for you to start pitching questions. We want to have this as more of a conversation. I just want to kind of set things up. You know those awful light bulb jokes? How many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? You can only change if you really want to change. How many gurus does it take to change a light bulb? Find the change from within and the light from within. How many feminists does it take to change a light bulb? That's not funny. How many men does it take to change a light bulb? One, he holds the light bulb and thinks the world revolves around him. How many Zionists does it take to change a light bulb? I did men jokes, so nobody could accuse me of being anti-feminist. How many Zionists does it take to change a light bulb? 5. 1, screwing the light bulb. 2 more to dance around going, but we've come back to the land. Look at us. We're returning to the land. We're working with our hands. We're now the new Jews. We're part of a new Jewish revolution. We're the political Zionists of old. The 4th, to complain about the media coverage. And the 5th, to write the check. Once upon a time, the Zionist message from here in Jerusalem to you in the United States and elsewhere was just write the check. But that's not my message today. My message to you is Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah. From Zion shall come forth a new Torah. The Torah is identity Zionism. The Torah is we need identity, we need community, we need connectedness, and we have this vehicle to find meaning, to find connection. In England a few years ago, they created a minister of loneliness. Jews don't need that. Sometimes we need a little minister of privacy. But that's a beautiful thing. We're part of one extended family. And so why I'm a Zionist? I'm a Zionist because I was born into this amazing conversation. I'm a Zionist because I was born into this amazing people. And I'm a Zionist because I was born to this tremendous adventure. And so I want to invite you into a conversation from political Zionism, while still working on that, to identity Zionism. From never again, while we still honor our Holocaust martyrs, to never alone. You're part of one people. We've got your back and you've got ours. And increasingly, as we look around, for decades, our friends on the left have been yelling peace now, but with the Abraham Accords, building on the peace treaty with Jordan and with Egypt and with all these other opportunities, I yell peace more. The more peace we have, the more opportunities we have to build, the less we'll have one Arab-Israeli conflict, the more we'll add an S, we'll have Arab-Israeli conflicts, and we'll pick them off one after another, and we'll solve this problem like we've solved all the other problems. So that next Yom Ha'atzmaut, on the Diamond Jubilee, when you've got your ice cream lined up and you're ready to celebrate this miracle, we can perhaps also celebrate the miracle of a true peace built on mutual respect and mutual love. Thank you very much, and Chag Sameach.
Thank you so much, Gil. Very moving, and Chag Sameach. And now it is my supreme honor to introduce you to someone who was not born into this identity, but he casts his lot with our people every single day and fights against all the attacks on political Zionism. He's my hero and someone who I have the honor and privilege of spending every working day with, Hussein Abu Bakr Mansour. So Hussein is going to be fielding the questions for us. Hussein.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah, for this introduction. And thank you very much, Gil, for this wonderful presentation. I'm not Jewish, I'm not Israeli, but I feel personally honored to be now a part of this amazing story that is truly inspiring and truly is something to behold, because it says a lot about not just Jews as a people and as a culture, but it says a lot about all of humanity. So again, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. One of the questions that we received constantly is actually, and you touched on this, is the developments that are going on in the United States. There is now a sense of alarm that anti-Semitism is rising in the United States. College campuses are basically now kind of the hub of this level of anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli sentiments. You have apartheid weeks going on around the country. You just had a major incident with the Harvard Crimson endorsing the BDS. Now, how can American Jews feel this sense of pride, feel this joy of belonging, while they feel that they are under this constant attack, and what they should do about it?
Thank you for that. So let's divide this into three parts. First, let's start with the good news. I watched the scene, and I spent many years at McGill University, which is even worse than many of the college campuses in the US, fighting the anti-Zionists who are anti-Semites. But let's start with the good news. The good news is that if we count, and people talk about the spike in anti-Semitism, we're still talking about very, very few incidents. And I got in trouble recently because I wrote an article about American anti-Semitism, and I said, every American anti-Semitic incident I know of has a happy ending. Because unlike in Europe, and unlike traditionally, every American anti-Semitism, active anti-Semitism, ends up with governors and mayors and sometimes presidents and neighbors denouncing it. After Pittsburgh, I happened to be in Kent Mill in Sarah's neighborhood and we got a call on Sunday, come out. Because the neighbors from St. Andrew's Church were coming to march up to our synagogue, to your synagogue, right? And they came with candles. Now, let's be honest, in the Middle Ages, when Christians came out of churches with something burning and walking towards synagogue, it was bad news. But in America, it was good news. And we hugged and we wept, and they said, this is not us. And so I refuse to define America by the one crazy person in Pittsburgh. I defined him by the millions who denounced it. And I still, even in the college campuses today, refuse to define the college experience and the students by the crazy professors and the crazy students. So that's the good news. But nevertheless, you're right. And look, this is a very painful subject for me because I'm a case of arrested development. I got to university and never left. I loved it so much. So first, let's talk broader structurally. The university that I was accepted to, that I entered into, no longer exists in many places. I never knew where the way some of my professors voted, if they voted Republican or Democrat, because they were teaching us American history. The nicest compliment I could get at the end of this survey course I would teach in American history is, are you Republican or Democrat? These days, if you don't show your colors, you're evil and you'll get called out. So the university itself, especially the elite universities, have become twisted, have become distorted. And by the way, I call out our American Jewish parents who put our kids under so much pressure to get into those universities, and they don't prepare them. So what can we do about it? Two very quick answers. One, identity Zionism. I don't want to guilt my students and my young people into defending Israel. I call this Pilates. If they come with a strong core of identity, if they come with a strong sense of pride, if they come with a strong nose for the anti-Semitism, they can smell the anti-Semitism behind the anti-Zionism. They smell, how is it that little Israel is such a central obsession? How is it that we call out Israel while our universities have all kinds of exchanges with China and all kinds of other countries and take millions of dollars from Saudi Arabia or Arab autocracies? How is it that Israel has become so central? How is it that, and we see this in the Harvard Crimson editorial, you read it and you see, this is the way to show my tribalism and my trendiness. I fit in by bashing Israel. So the first way to attack it is by Pilates, by having identity Zionism afar. Kids arrive on campus with a strong sense of pride. And by the way, this is not just about Jews. If young Americans come to campus saying, wait a minute, I don't want to be propagandized. That's educational malpractice. I want to come for an education. I don't want to know where you stand politically. I want to know where you stand vis-a-vis science or physics or math or physics or American history. So it has to be a broader critique. That's internally. And externally, we absolutely have to be much more effective in, first of all, finding allies. We're so good at what we call slacktivism. Sarah sends me an email that says, that bashes the Harvard Crimson. What do? I send it to 10 other people who already agree with me. No, I should send it to 10 other people who are friends of mine who may not be in the fight, and have a conversation with them and personalize and say, I'm really hurt. I'm a Harvard alum. And this isn't the Harvard that I joined. What are they doing? Can you help me out? So we have to personalize the fight, and we have to start being much more effective.
Thank you. I'm actually going to take a prerogative question myself. You wrote an article recently, I don't remember when exactly, but it was great. And in the Jerusalem Post, only God can now save American Jews. It was a great article, and it touched on a very important subject, which is the relationship with Judaism, also the faith. American Jews, by the end of the day, they are part of the society in which they live. There is a larger American context in which religious thought is in a deep crisis. Religious belonging, religious communities, faith in general. And of course, this, and they see it in a lot of young American Jews personally, and it's one of my observations as a person who came as an outsider to this society, that there seems to be a real crisis. What do you suggest? How can you maintain, or for young Jews, how can we help them to maintain a connection with the Jewish identity, even with their own crisis of faith or lack of faith or questions about faith?
So thank you for that. First of all, I was very moved by your introduction, because I really believe that the kind of Zionism I'm talking about, the identity Zionism, shouldn't be an exclusive club, and it should be an opportunity for us to have conversations with people of faith and people of identity, people who see that nationalism isn't a dirty word, people who understand that the best way to be a universalist is to be a particularist. The best way to contribute to the world, the way I contributed to that horrific problem in Florida when the buildings collapsed, was by having my country, Israel, send some of my fellow soldiers there to help. And so that's contributing to humanity through particulars and through nationalism. More specifically, let's talk about that amazing book by Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T, called The Righteous Mind. And he tells this crazy story about being a good secular American, raised in the I, the me, the my, the more. And he ends up in India, and he's really put off by all the weird, primitive rituals they have. Until finally he remembers an article that he read by his advisor, Richard Schwader, who talks about how every human being needs a sense of autonomy. He goes, I got that. I'm really good at autonomy. I, me, my. That's more my sweet spot. But we need two other things. We need a sense of community, and we also need a sense of divinity, of sanctity. And even if we secularize it and say divinity, sanctity, purpose, right? And he said, oh, I realize all these weird rituals of theirs, they're props. I'm really good at the I. They're really good at the us, and the forever. We Jews, Muslims, Christians, people of faith are often much more expert at the us and at the forever. And so we need that conversation. And ultimately, yes, I think that the crisis that we're seeing, this crazy article in the New York Times about 50% of our young people being lost, is a crisis of faith. There's a great line that I've got, a God-sized hole in my heart. I think it's like a country song. I got a God-sized hole in my heart. Right, and this goes back actually to great thinkers of the in Catholic theology. But we do have God-sized hole in our heart, and so I think we need to fill it. We need to fill it with community. We need to fill it with identity. We need to fill it with faith. And yes, you know, as a Zionist, I'm so proud of the fact that someone like Theodor Herzl went from a world where it was always a leap of faith to a leap of hope. Right, and hope is the human understanding that by having the dream, we can also roll up our sleeves and make that dream come true. And we still need a leap of hope. And when I read those New York Times figures, I see there's a lack of hope. And that's one of the crises in America today. But I also think we need that leap of faith. We need to remember there's something more significant than the sale at the mall. We need to know that there's something more significant than having lots of likes on Instagram and Facebook. We need to know there are more real friends than the fake friends we have on Facebook. I know that's mom book. That's an old that's for old people. And I know at the end of the day, we need to find something significant. That's the loss. And I want the Zionist conversation, the identity Zionist conversation, to be an opportunity for all of us, wherever we come from, whatever communities we have, to find that substance, that rootedness, that sense of belonging. And I think of it as 3 B's. 1, to simply be Jewish. 2, to belong, which is more active. You're not just born into it, but you say, okay, I'm a part of it, never alone. And 3, what are we becoming through the sense of belonging? What are our aspirations? And I say to young people, I say, are you Jewishly ambitious? And they go, wow, I've been asked, what are you going to be when you grow up? Where are you going to college? And nobody's ever asked me, what are your Jewish values? Are you Jewishly ambitious? What are your Jewish dreams? What are your, Rosh Hashanah often, the new year is all about how big the hat is going to be and how big the roast is going to be. I want to know how big your heart is going to be the next year.
Oops, you're on mute.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for this answer. For the people who are asking about the recording, yes, after the webinar is going to be done, the recording will be made available to all of you and will be sent to you through email. We received a couple of questions about the state of Israel itself. It seems that today the Israeli public politically is more divided than ever in its history. What, in your opinion, what happened recently that caused Israelis to be this divided?
Once upon a time, we used to joke about how healthy American politics were and how unhealthy Israeli politics were. I think these days there's been a little bit of a shift, and Israel seems downright sane and rational compared to American politics. So yes, I certainly see the divisions. But for example, one of the things that's so magical about the feeling right now on the street, I just had a coffee before I came, and I walked up and down the street, and we were all experiencing it. It didn't matter what party you voted for. It didn't matter whether you were religious or not religious. And in fact, if you think about both Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day and Independence Day, I don't know one person who didn't stand and say Kaddish. And the memorial prayer, the religious memorial prayer for Yom HaZikaron, for Memorial Day. So while the headlines often emphasize how different we are, how divided we are, the reality And especially, we don't need to be attacked, right? You certainly see it when we're attacked, but we also, when we celebrate together during these 9 days of we put our differences aside. And that's, I'm afraid, I'm not seeing that as much in America as I used to. July 4th, Thanksgiving, Columbus Day, rather than becoming moments of becoming touchstones, become points of contact and points of division. And we know that Memorial Day has a last name in Israel, in America, called Sale, right? And in Israel, Memorial Day is Memorial Day. But nevertheless, and I snuck this in earlier when I was talking about the connections, once upon a time, AIPAC used to talk about how we were connected by shared values and shared interests. And now, and because a stool is stronger if it's 3 parts rather than 2 parts, I add shared challenges. We do have shared challenges. The West is having serious issues in the age of technology, in the age of Twitterdom, and I spell Twitterdom D-U-M-B, in the age of leadership which often resembles drive-by shootings, rather than leadership which is thoughtful and complex, leadership by demagoguery. All of us are seeing both the technical facilities and the technologies and the algorithms that emphasize our division and play to our yetzer hara, our negative impulses, and leaders who then exploit that. Nevertheless, right now in Israel, we have this crazy, wonderful experiment of 8 different parties in a coalition who are trying to figure out, can we work together? And the glue behind that was conversations that began when Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, who come from a little bit from the right and a little bit from the left, first made it to Knesset, and they started sitting and having lunch. And you know what they talked about? They called themselves the 70-30 Club. And they said, yes, 30% we disagree, but there's 70% about which we agree. And unfortunately, in our headlines, in our social media, in our workplaces, in our increasingly around our family tables, and from our leaders, everybody emphasizes the 30%. We've got to go back to the 70%. And it's the 70% which gave them the glue and gave Yair Lapid the ability to say, hey, wait a minute, I got more votes, I got more mandates, but I'm going to let you, Naftali Bennett, have the first round. And it was the 70% that had Naftali Bennett say, you know what, I come from the right, I come from a party that is rebelling against me, but we have to have something after the 4th election. We need to go forward. So that's my complicated answer to that.
Thank you. We received a question asking, when my friends hear I'm a Zionist, they usually assume I'm against Muslims and Palestinians. Why is my definition of Zionism and theirs is so different? And how do I explain it to them in a way they can understand?
So thank you for that. First of all, I have to say that I'm very proud of the fact that in the 21 years I've been at this, and I've been celebrating identity Zionism. When you talk about identity Zionism, I've never been accused of being an Islamophobe. I've never been accused of denouncing Muslims because, in fact, I sometimes annoy my right-wing friends and I annoy my friends in Orthodox schools when I say my ardent American nationalism and my ardent Jewish nationalism, i.e. Zionism, is why I will never disrespect Palestinian nationalism. I will criticize Palestinian national culture. I will criticize the Palestinian addiction to terrorism. I will criticize the Palestinian desire to have an Israel apartheid week rather than a Palestinian nation week. I will criticize the Palestinian need to knock me down rather than build themselves up. But I understand the need to clump together. I understand the need to be tribal. But I want to make my tribalism transcendent. And so my definition of Zionism, which starts with we are a people with ties to a particular homeland, which doesn't preclude others from having ties to that homeland. And I'm talking about New York, because I know that New York was sold for $24, Manhattan, from the Native Americans to the Dutch, right? Life is complex. So we are a people, we have ties to a particular homeland, and we have the right to establish a state on that homeland like 192 other countries. That is not an either-or definition. That is a definition about who we are. And I refuse to make my conversation about Zionism revolve around them. But because it doesn't revolve around them, it also doesn't revolve around knocking them down. And I often say I'm suffocating from the way the Zionist conversation plays out in America. My friends on the left are so quick to jump on what I call delegitimization derby. I dislike Bibi, or I dislike this policy, or I dislike, I'll even use the O word, occupation. Therefore, Israel doesn't have the right to exist. Really? How did you get there? Why couldn't you just say, okay, let's criticize things and let's roll up our sleeves and change things? Why knock us down and why question our very right to exist or our very peoplehood, like the Palestinian National Covenant and the Hamas Charter does? And my friends on the right are often so defensive, are so fearful of any kind of self-criticism, that they're suffocating in a different way. They're not as bad, of course, but they're suffocating in a different way. They're not allowing us to grow as a democracy. We have to be a little self-critical and say sometimes, yeah, we made a mistake. I started with that tragic incident of friendly fire. Mistakes were made and corrections had to be made. But what? We have this wonderful self-corrective mechanism, not just because we're really good at beating ourselves up and breastfeeding, but it's called democracy. And so we make mistakes, but we also can go forward.
Thank you. Now, this is going to be the last questions I want to ask. I want to thank all of our audience members who sent us questions. And again, you will receive the recording through email after the webinar is over. The last question is actually asking you for a comment about the recent comments by the Russian foreign minister concerning the Holocaust and how Jews were caused the Holocaust. And is this should be a concerning sign that there is an Eastern European form of anti-Semitism that is also coming back?
You know, it's so sad for me. I'm a Daniel Pearl Jew. I grew up like Daniel Pearl in the 1960s. I was lucky, like Daniel Pearl. He got into Stanford. I got into Harvard. He became a journalist. I became a professor. He had the Wall Street Journal behind him. I had McGill University behind him. We both believed, I didn't know him, but I know his mentality, and I've had the pleasure of meeting his father, Judea Pearl. We both believed that we grew up in a post-Auschwitz covenant. We both believe that we grew up in a world where they had learned the lesson of the Holocaust, the end of anti-Semitism. And of course, Daniel Pearl is the journalist who was kidnapped and then murdered by Islamists. The Wall Street Journal couldn't help him. His Americanness couldn't help him. His Stanford degree couldn't help him. And on that day, when he was beheaded, I learned that anti-Semitism was coming back. And I see anti-Semitism on the left, and I see anti-Semitism on the right. And I see anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe, and I see anti-Semitism in Western Europe. And the dumbest, most offensive, most ridiculous argument taking place, especially in American Jewry today, is which is worse, left-wing anti-Semitism or right-wing anti-Semitism? I have zero tolerance for any forms of anti-Semitism. So I don't accept it from the Russians. I don't accept it from the Ukrainians, even if they're under attack. I can smell the anti-Semitism from some of their statements too. I don't accept it from supporters of Donald Trump, even if I can say thank you to Donald Trump for moving the embassy to Jerusalem and for recognizing our capital and for recognizing the Golan Heights and for the Abraham Accords. I can say thank you, but call out your right-wing crazy people. And I need the right to call them out. And I can certainly say to my left-wing friends, stop yelling and screaming about Trumpian anti-Semitism. Why don't you fix what's going on in the universities? So we need to have zero tolerance for all forms of anti-Semitism. We need to end this silly debate. And in fact, mobilize our left-wingers to fight left-wing hatred of all kinds, left-wing bigotry of all kinds, because we know it exists, and right-wingers to fight right-wing bigotry, right-wing hatred of all kinds. Let me finish with one final story, if I may. As I thank you for all your amazing work, for those excellent questions, and for the vision that you have, that we can't, I call this the jujitsu, J-E-W. We can't be stuck in the negative. We have to turn it into a positive. We have to turn it into a celebration. We have to go from Yom HaZikaron to Yom HaTzmaut. We have to go from the pain of Memorial Day to the joy of Independence Day, from, if you will, to be cheesy, the oi to the joy. So a few years ago, I have the pleasure of volunteering for Birthright and being the chair of their education committee in a lay capacity. And a few years ago, and this is not a partisan endorsement, a young man by the name of Naftali Bennett won his first election and became the education minister and was ex officio head of the steering committee of Birthright. And he comes to Birthright and he says, banging on his table, he said, we have got to turn the next generation of Birthright students and Jewish students into fighters to fight against delegitimization, to fight against anti-Semitism on campus. Everybody looked down. That's not what Birthright is. Birthright is Jewish Identity 101. Birthright is with these students, know your daily show, who don't even know how to ask questions, who are at such an early start that if you started with the heavy-handed guilt trip, they'd run away. But nobody wanted to disagree. Now, the great thing about having tenure, and even better, the great thing about being a volunteer, is I can raise my hand, because what, you're going to fire me? Okay, I'll have more free time to write. So I raise my hand and I say, Minister Bennett, welcome aboard. We're really moved by your presence here. But I understand what you're saying, and no one has fought delegitimization as far as around this table as I have. I've been on McGill campus for 20 years. I wrote a book about the Zionism's racism resolution. I understand what you're talking about. But that's not Birthright. Birthright is an identity journey. Birthright is Pilates. Birthright is first saying, have that strong core. And to his credit, unlike most politicians, he put his hand in his pocket, pulled out his business card and said, let's meet. And so I met him in the Knesset, and he had that cute little kippah on his head, which was much smaller than mine. And we discovered that he has some bus driver in Petach Tikva who created some ooey gooey sticky thing to keep it on his head. And we're sitting in the Knesset and we're talking about identity. And I said to him, and with this I'll end, I said, Minister Bennett, you don't understand. Human beings need this. Now, he's looking quite offended because no one comes to the Knesset, to the religious Minister of Education, and makes this sign. I said, no, I'm not making that sign. What do human beings need? We need rootedness. And by having rootedness, we have a sense of purpose, of sanctity, of divinity. We look up. And what else do we need? We need community. That's what I get from Israel. That's what I get from the Jewish people. That's what I get from Zionism. That's what we all need. So bless you, my children. I wish you all a happy Yom Ha'atzmaut. May you have rootedness. May you have a sense of purpose. And may you all have what you have on this call and what you have through Emet, community. Thank you very much. Chag Sameach.
Thank you so much, Gil. This was incredibly insightful, brilliant, and very, very inspiring. And again, I want to thank Hussein, who is not a Jew by birth or a Jew by choice, but he has cast his lot with our people, defending us every single day on Capitol Hill.
So you should have ice cream too tomorrow, Hussein.
Thank you so much. This was really so incredible. We have gotten so many very, very positive comments on the chat. We will be sharing this actually on Friday. It will be going around in case you missed it on our emails. And Gil, we will be in touch for further discussions. Thank you so much.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Bye-bye.